Yo, what is up, guys? Back with another reaction video. We are going to be doing a video on Medhi, Hasan and Matt Walsh. I know they kind of got into it a little bit over Twitter. And Matt Walsh is one of the biggest voices on the right, for those that don't know. And then Medhi Hasan is a journalist, mostly a left-wing journalist that kind of covers topics like what's going on in Gaza. Anyway, let's see what he has to say about what Matt Walsh was saying to him.
We need to talk about Matt Walsh. And if you're asking Matt who, then I'm truly envious of you. Normally, I wouldn't waste time responding to basically an internet troll, but Matt is so emblematic of everything that is wrong with the modern MAGA right: faux outrage, self-victimization, verbal abuse, a walking, talking Dunning-Kruger. Now, Matt Walsh, who says he's a conservative Christian, is upset with me for being a Muslim and for being an immigrant, but above all else, for being an American. That he cannot stand. So he did an entire 13-minute video calling me a spiteful, lying, self-entitled brat, on top of his tweet in which he called me an ungrateful little bitch.
See, this is this is very interesting. Just looking at this tweet, he says Christianity built this country, Islam did not at all, even in the slightest way. That's why we have our church bells, you ungrateful little B word. So let's unpack that statement fully, right? I think where we need to start off is America was founded on this idea of, freedom of expression, right? That's literally the First Amendment for a reason, right? And that includes the ability to express yourself. And, when people try to talk about how America was founded as a Christian nation, I think what people kind of don't realize is that when everything was being settled, they specifically separated church and state for a reason, and they wanted to have the government be secular. Now, of course, you still had groups like the Pilgrims, and so I would be lying to you if I said that most of the Americans were not Christian. That would be a lie. But this idea that, oh no, like you have to be a Christian, that's the only way to exist in the American populace, is literally asinine. Because even back then, if that was truly the case, they would have explicitly said so.
Just as Jesus would have said. Now, before we get into the substance of Matt's claims, if we can even call it that, before we get into what I said about Muslims and the founding of America, a little bit of background on who Matt Walsh is. Shock jock podcaster, former radio DJ, and now basically that Daily Wire guy who isn't Ben Shapiro. He's also the guy who hasn't got the greatest of political judgment. He went all in on Ron DeSantis in the GOP primary and then had to come crawling back to Trump when DeSantis got destroyed, as some of us predicted he would. Matt is also the guy who said COVID wasn't a big deal, that, quote, it's totally irrational to panic over this virus. He later admitted he got it wrong. But here's my favorite. Matt was so bothered by a black woman playing Ariel in the Little Mermaid movie that he actually said this.
From a scientific perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have someone with darker skin who lives deep in the ocean.
There are no words to describe how dumb you have to be to try and make scientific arguments about...
Yeah, so how are you going to make scientific arguments about a fantasy story? Scientifically speaking, there is no way that there's a creature out there that's half human and half fish. Like, the fuck is we talking about?
About the skin color of mermaids, which are fictional fucking characters, Matt. This is the guy who millions on the right turn to for intellectual guidance, historical analysis, and thought leadership. Then you wonder why this country is so screwed right now. By the way, just quickly, consistency isn't really his thing either. In May of this year, he said identifying as a girl dad is super cringe and corny. In 2020, though, he said being a girl dad is a great blessing. He constantly complains about political violence and death threats when they're aimed at him, but he's happy to dish it out to the people he doesn't like. He's called for the mayor of Chicago, a black man, to be executed. He's called for Jimmy Kimmel, a comedian, to be arrested. He once said this too.
But it is in fact true that you have to make people hurt. And I'm sorry, but holding signs and yelling loudly will not make anyone hurt.
You have to make people hurt. Now, what's really bothering him about me is that I said in a recent visit to Dearborn, I think that if you can play church bells, you can pray the call to prayer. Isn't it okay for Muslim Americans to broadcast a call to prayer? I mean, let me add right now, within reason, of course, and in accordance with all local sound and noise ordinances. But Matt went nuts and said Christianity built this country. Islam did not at all in even the slightest way.
Yeah, and just to expand on that again, right? Like, even when you look at the the founding of America, the Constitution at no point mentions Christianity or any specific religion, right? Even in specific articles of the Constitution, it explicitly forbids religious tests for holding public office. And obviously, the context of this time period is you're looking at, the Enlightenment period, which favored more secular government and reasoning. So that was brought into the thought process of the founding fathers. So again, just explicitly saying, that Christianity built this country is a lie. Of course, there's still a lot of influence of Christianity in the culture itself, but that doesn't mean that it was the ultimate foundation of the country.
That's why we can have our church bells. To which I responded, 1 in 3 of the slaves who built this country were Muslims. They were here long before the Walsh family arrived. You'd know that if you'd studied history, but I know MAGA has an issue with studying. To which Matt responded with a 13-minute video in which he got really mad, but was unable to rebut the 2 central points that I made. Number 1, enslaved people helped build this country. And number 2, perhaps up to 1 in 3 of those slaves were Muslims. Matt can't rebut that because it's true, according to historians, according to the African American History Museum, according to the US State Department. Muslim slaves are a historical fact. As his boss Ben Shapiro has famously declaimed, facts don't care about your feelings, Matt. It's not my fault if they didn't teach you about slavery in high school. In his video, Matt Walsh sounds like a Monty Python sketch. What did the slaves ever do for us? Ignoring the railways, the roads, the ports, the literal seat of our government, the White House, and the Capitol, all built by enslaved people. And 1 in 3 of them, remember, being Muslims, black African Muslims. Matt is also...
Yeah, that's another thing that a lot of people of his ilk try to do is they'll try to downplay, if they're not trying to downplay slavery itself, they'll try to downplay the, I don't say positive effects, but the contributions that the slaves made to this country, right? Whether you're looking at it from agricultural labor, right? Like Medhi, like Hasan said, right? Building the railroads, the different industries that they played a part in, the fact that they were able to get all this labor from these people for essentially no cost to their own whatsoever. Right, dudes will look at that and they'll say, it doesn't really matter. It didn't do anything. And they do that because they don't want to feel as if they have to give Black people credit for anything. Given their views on African Americans specifically. So they need to either downplay their struggles, downplay their obstacles, or downplay the contributions that they made to this country's history. And it's truly a shame that that's the angle that they have to go.
Also just completely clueless about the Muslims who fought in the Revolutionary War, in the War of 1812, in the Civil War, where most of them fought in the Union Army. But then again, Matt's been pictured wearing a Confederate t-shirt, so maybe he's mad that the Muslims fought against the Confederacy. He even issues this challenge to me.
If Islam had ceased to exist 300 years ago, this country would not have lost a single thing. There is not a single good thing about our country that we would not have if not for Islam. And if you doubt that, then go ahead and give me an example of the great gift that Islam has given to this country since its founding.
Has he never heard of the Golden Age of Islam, which helped fuel the Renaissance and the Enlightenment in Europe, which of course then helped produce the American founding fathers? Has he ever gotten off of the internet and read a book? Well, look, I'm happy to fill the gaps in his education. He asked me to explain what Islam or Muslims have done for America. I mean, the black Muslim slaves aside, more recently, how about the planning of the moon landings? That was a Muslim American scientist and immigrant. How about the science behind modern skyscrapers? That was a Muslim American engineer and immigrant. How about brain tumor treatment? That was a Muslim American neurosurgeon and immigrant. Just this year, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry went to, among others, a Palestinian American Muslim immigrant whose research Matt could never possibly understand and whose work could help tackle man-made climate change, which Matt doesn't believe in. Because Matt Walsh's knowledge of science is right up there with his knowledge of history. So what does he do? The guy who can't rebut basic facts. He attacks me. He goes after me for a speech I gave nearly 2 decades ago, which I said awful, dumb, bigoted things about the gay community, about non-Muslims, which I've regretted, disowned, apologized for multiple times over the decades. He thinks it's a gotcha. But here's the problem for Matt. What I said back then are essentially Matt Walsh's views right now. Matt is an anti-gay bigot today. In fact, Matt supports a Uganda law imprisoning gay people. I don't. Matt thinks most pop music is satanic. I don't. What I stupidly said nearly 20 years ago in my 20s, Matt basically says today, aged almost 40. Oh, and if you're going to play the game of what were you saying in embarrassing videos decades ago, here's what Matt Walsh was saying in 2010.
But to all of a sudden act like this phenomenon of girls getting pregnant at a young age that we consider young, 16 or 17, to act like it's a new thing is ridiculous. It's always been that way. Girls between the ages of like 17 and 24 is when they're technically most fertile.
That's pretty gross, pretty disgusting. I think we can all agree. And also kind of creepy. A 25-year-old man telling his audience how fertile 17-year-old girls are. What is wrong with you, man? I mean, it's also ironic that the right are obsessed with smearing Muslims as child molesters and saying Islam supports child marriage, and yet here is Matt on tape saying that about 17-year-old girls.
I mean, yeah, no, the right has a invested interest in the impregnation of teenage to young adult females. It's really quite odd. I think part of that is because of the whole population decline, specifically in the white community. Part of that is because of their whole, it's a masculine thing to have a bunch of children, and the images they used to see from, the quote unquote good old days of like the 50s and earlier. So I think it's a combination of all of those idyllic things from a right wing perspective is why they're so hyper focused on impregnating or getting married off to young adult women. And I also think part of that is also because they obviously have an aversion to feminism, and they view feminism as quote unquote breaking up the nuclear family. So they figured anything to try to suppress like women individuality, expression, that kind of stuff, because they don't really view that as being necessary. So anything to kind of break that up is what they're going to support. So yeah, that's kind of usually where those talking points come from.
About children. So, look, to conclude, who is more American? The guy who supports free and fair elections, me, or the guy who got mad when judges locked up violent insurrectionists who tried to overturn the 2020 election, Matt Walsh? Who is more American? The guy who supports the First Amendment and free speech, me, or the guy who wants to imprison people and deport people for their speech, Matt Walsh? Who is more American? The guy who supports the United States, me, or the guy who wore a t-shirt celebrating the violent traitors of the Confederacy, Matt Walsh? Who is more American? The guy who supports religious pluralism and separation of church and state as intended by the founders, me, or the guy who wants Christian nationalism in America and proudly calls himself a theocratic fascist, Matt Walsh? Yeah, I think I've made the case that I'm much more of an American and much more of a patriotic American than you are, Matt. And you're just going to have to go whine and cry about it.
No, you definitely cooked it. I think my closing thoughts on this entire situation is, you look at a guy like Matt Walsh and people of his ilk, and there are a couple of things that they all have in common. They all like to create this narrative for themselves. And in order to do that, they don't really look at facts. They need a scapegoat group or some type of boogeyman to, to target, to be the target of their bigotry or their conflict or their aggression. And then they have some type of weird abstract vision of the past that they want to quote unquote return to, that doesn't actually exist. And because the people that usually follow them don't really do any readings, don't do their homework, don't really challenge their thoughts or really try to synthesize information, evidence together, they're kind of able to just get away with saying random nonsense. But yeah, no, this was a good video though. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and most importantly, remember to have a good day.